based on the presentation that you just heard. Please.
What does the whole thing add up to? You gave us piece by piece, but I didn't get the total.
The total dollar amount or the total dollar?
Yeah, the total dollar amount for all the 5 priorities is 375.7. This is an estimated cost, so it may be changing. This is the first time we estimated these projects. So 375.7, almost $376 million.
And we're going to take a couple questions from the group here, and then we're going to take an online question as well. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes. How does it compare to the present Clean Safe Creek program as far as cost goes?
Well, we have different components now. We didn't have a water supply reliability component in Clean Safe Creeks, so you can't really compare apples and apples directly.
The brochure and Luis were careful to report that these are the amounts, the dollar amounts to be funded from the measure. How did you determine what portion of the total costs of these projects would be funded from this measure? For example, Anderson Dam is listed at $40-some million, but the costs range from 100 to 150 million. How did you make judgments about what portion of the costs would be funded from this measure?
What we did is, this goes back to not only the polling, not only the surveys, not only the community information, but each of our, as we were receiving information, we had criteria for each portion of projects. So each area, the areas you see, A, B, C, D, each had a different criteria in order to pull up the information. Then staff, we had technical leads on each area to that tried to balance the different projects that we're bringing forward to try to make sure that we brought forward a complete and comprehensive program. So it wasn't an exact science, but it was based off of individual criteria, which would rank and raise the projects to the top.
Yeah, do you have more detailed, details of these projects as of yet, or will you develop them later?
We do have slightly more details on the projects. Is there something specific that you were looking for? But we will be developing more information, but we do have additional detail, just not a whole. What we try to do is provide everyone a summary of something that they could work with. Well, we will have a final report once we put this together, which will be providing much more detail on the portions of the projects. Is there an individual project that you are looking for more detail, or so I can better answer the question?
I'll talk to you.
Okay, thank you. For the folks online, she said she would talk to us later.
And I'm going to take one more question from this group, and then are there online questions yet? We're going to take an online question after.
Is it my turn?
I think we have right here in the middle.
Hi, yeah, my question was, the total cost of this project is roughly $376 million. In order to complete all the projects in here, what is the actual cost when you factor in the dependency upon other sources, federal funding, state funding?
There is some anticipated costs. What we've done is in this program, we've moved forward to make sure that we complete all the promises of the existing Clean Safe Creeks dollars. I believe if you are asking, are there some assumptions that are based on federal funding and state subventions, the answer is yes. We do have projects that will still require federal funding and state subventions in order to complete the projects. Some of the projects, however, we have attributed additional funding towards, knowing that we will hopefully be able to move those projects along. I think one in particular is Yagas, which you do see additional funding that was given towards Yagas.
So,
okay, the question that we got here is, another one just came in. So let me scroll to it. Is the district bound to spend the money exactly as outlined in the ballot measure, or are the dollar figures simply guidelines for spending?
In order to answer that, we'll have a resolution. We actually are not that far along, to be frank with you. I think what we will do is we'll have a resolution which will identify exactly what the projects are, how the funding will be spent, the board does have the capability to change funding in between areas. There's been some slight changes in funding priorities as related to our Clean Safe Creeks, or not change in funding priorities, but as a whole, I believe that would be an answer that'd be ultimately answered by our board, but we will be bringing back the plan as it's developed and saying, here's how we will be spending these dollars. I don't think there's going to be, we're not going to put out one program and then switch it over to something else. That will not be occurring.
Rick, are you coordinating? I understand you require 67% voter for that measure. Are you coordinating with local agencies? As you're probably aware, some cities are in dire strait, and they might put some on the ballot measure. Are we, if they are to put something like that, will the taxpayers be overloaded? Are we coordinating with other agencies?
Well, we are coordinating and talking with others. I was anticipating that there was going to be multiple measures that we're going to be dealing with shoreline, water bond potentials, and right now it appears that even at the statewide level, you might not see the water bond going forward. Will local agencies have the ability to put other projects forward? Yes. Would they look similar to ours? I would hope not. I would assume that, I don't think it's any secret to any agency at this point. We're in the course of meeting with all the cities, all 15 cities, with the mayor and the city manager to talk about not only this, but other projects and priorities. So the answer is yes, we are coordinating. If there's other measures on the ballot, could the public easily become overloaded? I think the answer to that is obviously yes. We have it online.
I'm not online. I'm sitting
sorry.
here.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
I
whether
know I
to put it-
disappear in the crowd. A question, what are you seeing for increasing volunteer activities in this? How do you, have you worked out any plans for greater outreach to the community to find volunteers to do these kinds of works? What kind of work do you think volunteers might do? And do you see any disruption or any problems with unions standing in the way of volunteers working?
I'm going to have to look to our technical leads. I know we do have many the dollars that are in there to help with certain portions. I see Ann standing up. Maybe Ann can help address that.
Good morning. My name is Ann Draper. I'm not quite sure I understand totally your question, but let me answer it in terms of what's in the measure. You will see in different parts things that are called partnerships and grants. And we anticipated that during the course of implementation that we might have direct partnerships with certain agencies, which could be governmental agencies or nonprofits, and there's also grants. And again, cities and nonprofits have been part of that. In particular, you'll see one that talks about stewardship grants. We just entered into some of those grants this last year. And one of the goals was to help facilitate organizations to include much greater volunteer action. And so that's in the implementation part. I'm going to turn it back to Rick if the part of your question was in terms of using volunteers to communicate about this measure, which I think was perhaps part of your question.
So in terms of using the volunteers to communicate around this measure, just like all public agencies, once this is placed on the ballot, we're restricted in what we can and what we cannot do. It's basically we cannot campaign with public dollars. So if indeed this moves forward, if indeed our board does place this on a ballot as a measure in July, then a volunteer campaign will have to spring up on its own in order to campaign and push this forward. Ken, did that address your question?
Not completely.
Hold it. Before we do that, let's do the mic. Let's take one more follow-up on this and then go to Scott and then to an online question.
That's all right. I'll catch up with you later on. My final thing was about interference from unions for volunteers working. That happens on a regular basis where lots of volunteer activities are planned and then unions say, sorry, that's going to take my job. You can't do that.
We
the
haven't had
question
any
is-
discussion like that. That has not come up yet.
It's a very important question.
So now we'll take a question from Scott and then we'll go online.
It seemed like the projects totaled up at $376 million, but you said you were going to raise $478 million with the measure. Where is the other $102 million?
Yeah, some of the money, some of the revenue that is raised is going to go to pay for Clean Safe Creeks, some of the projects in Clean Safe Creeks. Remember, if this passes in November of 2012, we're going to roll back Clean Safe Creeks, which now is set to expire in 2016. So we're going to have to put some money aside to complete that. And then there will be other costs as part of that. We are also looking at possibly doing both bond financing, so paying for the financing, that's another cost.
We're going to take an online question next.
Have you done an analysis as to the benefit per watershed versus the funds contributed by the residents/businesses within each watershed?
No analysis like that has been done, but again, I'll look to our technical leads to make sure I'm not, I see them shaking their head. No analysis like that has been done.
I'm going to move to this side of the room first and then come back. So we'll go to this question next.
Hi, thanks. In terms of watershed health, is there anything in the measure regarding non-point source toward TMDL?
Well, what's
I see in the measure
what's TNDL?
total maximum daily load.
Okay, great.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks.
There's some language about mercury, but was all I saw.
I'm going to look again to our technical lead in this area.
And just wait a minute. We're going to get you a microphone.
Maybe.
Somebody. We want to use the microphone particularly so that the online folks can hear. That's why we're taking a little time with it.
And the answer is yes. There are a number of places where reducing pollutants and toxins are included. There is specific mention of mercury because it's of great concern and is in our waterways. However, you will notice that there are other areas where we have information regarding continuing relationship with the Santa Clara Valley Urban Runoff Pollution Prevention Program and the pollution prevention programs that also go to the South County. We also have other emerging contaminants mentioned in there. So the short answer is yes, and it's in the brochure.
But we're going to take one more over here.
Okay, question is, since this 375 or 400,000, $400 million is talking about partial cost, what guarantees do we have that the federal and the state will be putting money in? Because I think the voters will want to know that before they vote for the extension of their tax.
Well, I would like to say I have both a direct line to the president and the governor, and they've given me assurances that our money will be forthcoming. But there are no absolute guarantees. Obviously, it's something that we continue to work on. The federal dollars are continue to dry up. We continue to lobby for our federal dollars. A lot of our projects also have state subventions. Fortunately, state subventions were funded through two different propositions. So the reimbursement for state subventions is definitely a lot more hopeful. However, you still need to, in order to receive state subventions, you still have to have a federal component to your project. So it's very difficult to continue to rely on federal dollars. It's difficult to lobby for them. But I'd like to say that there is hope in being able to have some of these projects funded.
Hi. Yes, I have a question about this component D about restoring wildlife habitat and providing open space. So there just seems to be a lot less detail here. So, for example, is there performance criteria, or is there going to be a technical advisory committee which will guide, prioritization, or a list of projects, specific projects? You have specific projects called out for flood control. Do you have specific projects called out for restoration?
I'm going to look again to our technical leads. I think both our project sponsor could probably address that as well as Ann Draper. So
Gosh, good thing I was here. I didn't know I was going to get these questions. I think that there's more detail in this brochure and that talk about some of the types of things that we would be talking about. And hopefully take a look at those, and hopefully they will answer your question. If not, please let me know. However, I do want to say that one of the things that's in here, it should be on page 1, 2, 3 at the bottom, is that we are proposing 7 grant rounds. There are a lot of nonprofits that work out there. And in this measure that we have right now, there is not only a dollar amount, but it's also to create a certain acreage. And we hit that acreage very early without spending a lot of money, not a lot, but we spent a lot, but not as much as we thought we were going to have to gain that acreage. And this caused quite a bit of distress among some folks about that. And so I wanted to point out that this is changing that from that acreage amount to number of grant rounds. And the reason that's in there is because we've thought that governmental agencies that we work with, nonprofits that we work with, things that are emerging that we're working on, it would be good to know that there would be a steady thing coming. There are some plans that we have which do identify those priorities for habitat restoration. We do have those plans. Some are in the Emerging Valley Habitat Conservation Plan that some of you are working on. And also we do in other habitat plans that we have. And so we do have those. However, there's also opportunity. And so we know that as time goes on, those opportunities arise. And so we didn't want to get so specific that we locked ourselves into something that couldn't happen while opportunities came. So I just wanted to point that out, that it shifts from a particular acreage amount to number of grant cycles. And so it would be regular intervals, and you'll see for 7 years, it's sort of like every other year is the goal here. So I just wanted to point that out.
So we're going to take, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take, I believe we've answered all the online questions so far. We're going to take one more question here from the audience, and then we're going to go into small group. There'll be another opportunity at the end of that time. And I'm going to take this question right here.
Yeah, I just want to answer one of your questions. I'm an advisor for the James Lick High School Leals Club and Environmental Club, and we just signed up to do Penitentiary Creek, parts of Penitentiary Creek to clean up. They'll clean it up 4 times a year, and this is how other people can help. This is completely
Great. So I'm going
on their
to,
own.
thank you very much. I'm going to take one more question then from
This
the
gentleman
gentleman
in
in
the
the
red.
back, right there in the red. Hold it just a minute so we get that online. Sorry, thank you. And the last question, then we're going to go to small group.
One of the stated study goals was to gauge a willingness to pay for various projects, and I noticed that some of the more expensive projects weren't necessarily on some of the higher priority areas, so I was wondering what the interplay was between the data and the data collected about the prioritization of the projects and the actual spending allocations.
And that's a very good question. I think if you look, the number one thing was providing clean, safe water. Directly behind that is the structural and the seismic issues. Obviously, there's a significant amount of dollars that are given to Anderson, but what we tried to do is make sure that there was enough dollars that are allocated to each area so that we can basically not only provide for what the public was asking us for, but at the same time being able to provide for for these projects in a meaningful way. So again, it's not an exact science. If it was an exact science and we were to say, well, since 90% of the people supported the water supply, that means 90% of the dollars would go towards water supply, and that then you'd have flood protection projects that would be left completely unfunded. So what we have is a careful balance of trying to make sure that we still have a measure that represents what the public asked for, but at the same time trying to make sure that we're building projects and bringing projects and programs to the community in a meaningful way.
Great, thank you very much. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of the morning session. There'll also be opportunity for you to ask those questions electronically after this. I know that there's a couple of online questions still, and there's still some questions in the room, but we want to move it to the smaller group dialogue. Again, there'll be 4 different ways to give input. We'd like to ask you to select someone from your group to take notes. I want to encourage you not to take meeting notes. This is not a board meeting, but what you want to be able to give is staff here at the end some brief bullet points that reflect the input from your group so that they can be included in the report. The second opportunity that you will have to give input as a result of your dialogue is in written form, because we're providing note cards. You'd be able to do that either this morning or after this meeting. The third way you'll be able to provide input is where we are going to make time at the end for a larger group discussion where we'll not only entertain questions but welcome your comments as well, which will be recorded and incorporated into the final report. And then the fourth way is we will create an electronic opportunity for you all to give input and to ask further questions up until November 15th. So we'll give you a couple of weeks after this meeting is over. What I want to encourage you to do is to, at each table, to actually answer these questions. And part of the reason why we're doing that is if we keep to this format at each table, it will allow us to much more effectively use this information. So the hope is that these questions are broad enough. We're not attempting to stifle any conversation. The attempt really was to make these questions broad enough so that you'd be able to really give the input you want, and at the same time create some structure so we can actually use the information gathered as a result of this meeting. The one thing I'd like to ask you to do before you start is if somebody came to your table after we did the check-in, make sure that they introduce themselves so that everyone at the table has had a chance to very briefly introduce themselves to the people that they'll be spending the next 40 minutes with. So we're going to take about the next 40 minutes and we're going to answer the following 3 questions. They're at your table. Do you understand the plan? And obviously that's going to be important because if there's gaps in either the plan itself or the way it was presented, that's really important information to know. And it doesn't mean that it's going to get answered today, but it does mean that there'll be some greater understanding about what are the gaps in the understanding of the plan. The second is, would you support the plan? Why or why not? And then thirdly, if not, what could be changed in the plan to garner your support? So again, these questions should be broad enough so that people would be able to give the input they want and at the same time provide some structure so that we can actually use this information as effectively as possible. Any questions? So your first job is to make sure there's no one in the table who hasn't been introduced to each other. Your second job is to select someone who will write bullet points as a result of the discussion you've had. And your third job is to take the next 40 minutes and get through the questions, and we'll give you 10 or 15, we'll announce when 10 minutes, each 10 minutes has elapsed. You'll know where you are in the process. Thank you very much.
This is for the person who'll be taking notes at the table. So
Okay.
so if you can hold that up and show us.
Is it at each table?
Oh, yeah, one of those is at each table.
Well, and there's notes for the scribes at each table. All right, everybody. So we're going to go to the last part of the morning. If you'll notice, we don't. I was going to say we don't have any flip charts in the room. Then I noticed that there was one over there. But we're not. What we're not going to do is we're not going to have flip charts in each corner of the room and make a long list of a lot of things that you might have discussed. Just because in my experience, it's hard to do much with that kind of information, to know what to do next with it. So instead, what we're going to do is, as I indicated before, we have lots of ways that we're gathering input from the wisdom of this group, all of which will be incorporated into a report, which I think oftentimes is much more helpful than a long list of particular suggestions that people have made in a list form. So what we're going to do now is have a discussion. Please feel free to make comments based on what you've learned from your group and the kind of discussion that you had. It's also a time for clarifying questions, and we'll do that for about 20 minutes. And what my experience tells me is that if we do that for about 20 minutes, the wisdom in the room and what you've discussed at table will come up. as a result of this 20-minute process, every bit as much as it would and more so than if we actually did any kind of formal report out from each group, although that is clearly the idea of the scribes at each of your table, that we will take the content of your discussions and make sure that that's recognized in the report as well. So for the next 20 minutes or so, we'll do comments and questions, and there's a number of people that are here to both listen to those comments and answer any questions that you have as a result. And then we're going to do a couple of these, and then we're going to ask for comments from our online community. So both comments and questions from online folks as well. So if you write in your questions, we will then, or comments, we'll then repeat those for the larger group. Please.
Again, I think our biggest question is still, how does this program fit into the overall funding of these projects? We're concerned about how the ratepayers are going to be impacted, what dependency you have on the federal government. We know the federal government's not giving us money. Are we still depending on that? Is that, there are assumptions in there for those numbers? So if we could get, I think, a better idea on exactly how this, what component of funding this is becoming is one of our biggest questions.
So there's a question that comes up a few times, which is, I think, probably a question about leveraging. And so let's deal, I don't know whether we're going to be able to answer it completely, but clearly it's a question that's come up this morning. Please.
Good morning. My name is Leon Lee. I'm the sponsor of this program. And I heard the question earlier that the federal and the state portion contribution for the program was not made clear in the information that you received so far. And we understand that. That information will come later. But now to address your question, Charles, the biggest federal cost share in this program is on the Yagas Creek. Yagas Creek, we assumed the Corps will pay for $11 million for the program, and that's only 25% of the cost that we need to do. That we have to assume because that we couldn't do any more using this program. And the other studies like San Francisco Creek or Shoreline, the main thing is we want to generate enough activities to move those projects along so that later on when we have the package ready, if another era funding is available, we can apply for those funds and get the projects built. So that was the approach that we want to rely on. We've learned from Clean Safe Creek that if you rely on the federal government too much, the projects will just get delayed. So that's the approach. And the other question to answer on the state part, state subventions, we know now that state has funding to pay for the subvention reimbursements. At least we've seen that coming in the recent years. We don't know if the state will be able to fund the complete share that they needed to pay for. But we are assuming that at least they will pay for a portion of it. And that's in the assumption. And we try to make enough conservative assumptions so that we make sure we have enough money to build the project. And then if those things don't materialize, at least our impact will not be that significant. And we've also learned from Clean Safe Creek, the existing program, that we need to make this process more transparent. So transparency is another consideration in how we present the message to the independent monitoring committee, to the technical advisory committee. How we present it, how we explain it, that's a key, and we certainly will do better the next time. Another issue that wasn't made clear to you in the earlier presentation was the system approach, that we've actually looked at the whole system. For instance, flood protection. Where are we? Do we really need to do these additional projects? We've mapped out every city by city the number of parcels that is still in the floodplain and determine if it's feasible to do a project to remove those people out of the floodplain. We've gone through that analysis. We've determined the benefit cost situation and come up with this program that we think is feasible, is what the community needs, and then we propose to you. Also, on the environmental side, for instance, in there you'll see a study to do the ecological mapping. In there, there's a project that we combine actually flood protection, fish habitat improvement, and the overall environment improvement, geomorphic control, all together. That information is not transparent to you. That's a lot more detail, but those will be coming later to you. I hope you understand that, and if you have any more questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please. Or please, excuse me. Oh. Then pass it right back when you're done.
Okay, so I want to follow up on the very last question that was asked before we broke up into groups, and that is, if you look at the dollars, and I kind of broke them down here, or added them up on the different sections, it doesn't seem to match the survey. So we're in this, it looks like we're overfunding the restoring the wildlife habitat and providing open space. Now, speaking from Cupertino, I love that. You know, we've partnered with the Water District, and we've done some great projects together to restore Stevens Creek. But if you go out into the environment, the economic environment that's out there right now, and you ask, and I think that's reflected in the survey, you ask people, are some of these things nice to haves versus really things we need? If you ask people, going back to the last thing you said, should we spend $12 million on an ecological data collection and analysis? I think they're going to question that, and I think that the opponents of this, and I'm sure they're going to be opponents, are going to latch on to some of this and say, you know, you're not spending your money wisely. So I think, you know, I'm going to support this in the end, but I think you need to go back and look at the survey data again and make sure that your message is more hard-hitting if you want to get this thing passed, because at the numbers you saw, it's right on the edge, and it's going to be a really tough environment out there for the next few years.
So I'm going to step in. I'm going to step in because there's three themes that have emerged on a number of times. I just want to sort of bring those up. There's issues and concerns around leverage, which is not uncommon given state and federal. So that we're hearing that, right? There's real concerns about if we went to the voters, for instance, you know, would we have a convincing case on the leverage side? There's the discussion around the actual money spent and the actual money raised and some of the things that have to go into issuing bonds, et cetera, and more explanation around that. And then this last thing, which I think, and I think these things are somewhat related, when we start sharpening our pencil around the budget, to pay particular attention to the budget and the survey and how those match up. Is that what? Okay, all right.
And that certainly is a very good question, Oren. And we've struggled with that question for a long, long time before we came up with this program. And the consideration that we finally gave was we really need to approach this program from a systematic approach, from a master plan approach. We needed to know what's in our watersheds. What endangered species are there, and where is their boundary? And when we develop our cities, our county, where is our boundary? What is our approach that we should take? We need to have that information in order to make those wise decisions for our community. So that was the need I think we need to meet, and we need to make people understand. Certainly, economic time is tough. People are not willing to pay more than they absolutely need to. That's why we set the price of this measure at that level, and hoping that we can all work together to get this message out, to get people to approve.
So that was exactly what, I'm glad you said that, makes a great segue, because the concern that we had here at the table was in tough economic times, please explain to the general public who's going to vote on this, in the previous parcel tax plan, what did you spend the money on and what were the results? Because you got another 15 years that you're going to be spending money and not telling people what the results were of that expenditure. That's our
So
question and comment.
there's a fourth issue that's come up. So let me just, I want to keep reiterating these so that we're clear and we can use this information. So we talked about the whole issue of leverage. We talked about the issue of direct costs versus the other needs that will be paid for out of this issue, this potential ballot measure. Thirdly, we talked about this notion of sharpening our pencils around the budget and taking a careful look at what the voters want to support. And then fourth, making sure that we're recognizing what work had been done in the past as a result of previous voter actions. Am I in the ballpark? Great. Let's have some more comments. This is the kind of information I think that is really, really helpful to folks.
Yeah, that's a wonderful comment. We certainly will do it.
More comments or questions?
What hasn't been mentioned is, or questioned about, is the economic benefits that by doing this project, these different projects,
Okay.
if you could elaborate a little bit more fully about the economic benefits to doing them rather than not having them happen, where, for instance, flooding, the huge cost of what will happen if the flooding takes place, I think that would be beneficial.
Great,
Okay.
great, thank you.
Yeah,
Another
that's
comment here?
I want to address that question a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
First of all,
I'll give
there
you all.
there are a couple projects that we definitely know will have great benefit cost ratios, like the Upper Penitentiary Creek, like the Berryessa Creek, the San Francisco Creek, that we know the community will benefit more than the cost. But there are also projects like Yagas. Yagas has been flooded.
I'm going to hold it. We're really right. I don't want to get too much into specifics because I want to make sure we get all the comments out. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's just get comments first, and then
Okay.
we'll come back to any, because
Okay.
I want to make sure that we're
Okay.
getting the, thank you.
At our table, we discussed two gaps that I brought up. The first gap is clean water pollution prevention. I feel the current plan doesn't devote enough resources to that.
Okay.
And I'm going to be specific about it. Studies have shown that 50 to 75% of pollution in urban creeks comes from applications of household chemicals in the home and in the garden.
Okay.
We're using too much fertilizer, too much pesticides, too much herbicides, and it's washing out of our gardens into our creeks.
Okay.
So we need to do more than fund this cover to the amount that we do. I think we need public education, large-scale public education in the water district area.
Great.
Secondly, water conservation. We had a giant 20 gallons, save 20 gallons program advertising budget. But in terms of impact to people, it wasn't personal, it wasn't immediate contact. The water district today offers 4 classes a year, which are attended by a maximum of 200 people on water conservation. It's held in this building. My organization, the Native Plant Society, organizes 40 talks a year at 20 different public libraries in the area. Over 1,000 people come to our talks. And this is done in cooperation with the libraries, volunteers from CNPS, and many professionals who speak to our groups. So I think the water district could be much more engaged in public education than it is today. And when the word goes out to the public, what are the ways you can save water in your lawn? You can reduce the amount of chemicals and pesticides you use. And what are the alternatives? If we are telling people not to have a lawn or to have smaller lawns, what do they replace it with? In the Native Plant Society, we tell them to plant native plants. And I think this disconnect between water conservation, clean water on the one hand, and these environmental, ecological projects we are talking about, you can bridge that gap in your home garden, plant natives, create a habitat, reduce the use of chemicals in your garden, and save money and effort. So there's a big role for the water district to play in all of this, and it should support and encourage organizations like the Native Plant Society in expanding that outreach. So that's sort of the two gaps. I think it can both be addressed by greater public education.
Great, thank you very much, thank you. Let's, do we have a comment or question online?
It's a question from the online community.
Okay.
Is an investment of $5 million for a shoreline feasibility study adequate in light of the enormous impact of future sea level rise to the South Bay?
Okay, and I'm going to take that as a, instead of answering specific questions, I'm going to take that as a comment, so there's a question about that. And I'm going to take 3 more comments. We've been at this a long time, and I want to commit to you to ending on time, and I want to try to get as much out in the room as possible. So let's take 3 more comments. So recognizing that there was a question would you repeat the question again?
Is an investment of $5 million for a shoreline feasibility study adequate in light of the enormous impact of future sea level rise to the South Bay?
And we'll make sure to get that answered
I'll
in
answer
the
that.
report, absolutely. 3 more comments, please.
We had a lot of concerns about how decisions were made and funding was allocated for the different projects. And also, I think there was a concern they had mentioned something about if the board made a decision, they could change the funding allocation. So making that clear, like if you say you're going to provide this much funding to a project, if an emergency happens and there's flooding, you know, can all those funds be pooled from other projects? And what's that process look
Great.
like?
Great, thank you, thank you. Please.
I have a question about ratepayers, water ratepayers. It seems like many of these projects should be handled by water ratepayers. Why are water ratepayers not taking on more of these projects than they are now?
So it's you're asking what's the role of the water ratepayer vis-a-vis
Yes,
these
and-
projects?
Exactly. Other companies would put infrastructure improvements. They pay for them by increasing their water rates, and it seems like we are providing cheap water through this bond. We're paying for our infrastructure through a bond and thus providing cheap water for everybody, and it seems like it's working against conservation.
Okay.
If you have cheap water, you are not going to get good conservation.
Let's take 2 more questions, comments.
Did you want me to address that?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. Sorry, Rick.
Okay.
We're not going to selectively address some questions and not others, but know that all of these questions and comments will be addressed in the final report, or in the report that's going to go out to you all. Something from online?
Yeah, it says, if we are to get a 2/3 vote in support of a tax, we have to have a win-win attitude. If the folks who don't see the importance of streams advocate for less funding of streams, and the folks who aren't impacted by flood advocate for less funding for flood control, we will have a lose-lose situation. We need to acknowledge that to pass this measure, we need significant funding for both streams and flood.
Great, great, thank you. Let's take one last comment or question. Please. All right.
I feel there should be a little bit more comparison of what we're doing right now with our Clean Safe program, what we will accomplish and have accomplished compared to what we're asking in this new program, so that people have something to see. Yes, I can see this has been done or that has been done. We don't. They need some concrete examples, and that would be the best way to show them of what possibly could be done with a new program.
Great. Thank you very much. So again, 4 different ways to give input. We're at the 10-minute mark, and we want to have a chance for closing. So thank you very much so far for the input this morning. There's also a chance for you to give written input. The discussion that you had that was noted by your scribe will be submitted, and there's also a chance to ask questions up until November 15th, and those questions and the answers will also be included in the report that goes out to you. And now I will turn the rest of the meeting over to the Water District.
Well, before we close, the one thing I wanted to do was direct everyone to our website. If you haven't gone there, the safecleanwater.org. There's a link there that would provide an email, which is going to be info@safecleanwater.org. So if there's additional comments or additional things that you would like to submit, please do so by November 15th. The next step that's going to occur is everything that we were informed by today, we're going to take another look at the program, try to compile what we've heard today, see if there's any changes that will be made to the program as it was presented. And what we're hoping to do is to roll that out to you on December 7th at the same time. It will be held in this room, probably a similar format, but we'll be more or less presenting what's going to be going forward to our board of directors. We anticipate that once that's done, we'll be going to our board of directors in March of this year. And if the board indeed likes the program as it's been developed and as it's being brought forward from both the surveys, the community surveys, from this forum, as well as other discussion, we are actually actively out in the community making presentations as well. So if there are places that or groups that you would like us to present this information to, please send that information along to the info@safecleanwater, and we'll make sure that we arrange for one of the members of our Speakers Bureau to come out and to make the presentation. But going back to March, if the board indeed does act to adopt this program in March, then we will likely be looking for and soliciting endorsements of the program with the anticipation that the board will place this on the ballot at the end of July to the mid to the end portion of July for the November 12 ballot. So that's, I think, where we are now. I want to look to the staff, and I do want to point to the staff. We had a lot of technical staff that was here, as well as a lot of the staff, and do want to thank them for pulling this together, as well as to all of you for coming today. We couldn't have done it without both the staff as well as with you in the room. Anything else from the staff that I might be missing that I should have pointed out? And if not, I want to thank the American Leadership Forum as well. They stepped up and helped us to pull this off. So thank you to Chris Block and the ALF. And if there's no other final questions or comments, I will thank everyone for coming. Please make sure that if you have any comments on the yellow comment cards, that they're placed in the red folder in the middle, as well as the scribe placed the yellow folder in the middle. And also, I did want to make one pitch for what we have is called a water walk tour that's going to be going to the Delta on November 18th. There's cards on your email. And if you were here, you'll also be receiving an email invitation to that tour as well. Thank you, everybody, for coming.